Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when Senator JD Vance, one of Donald Trump's fiercest defenders, walks onto Piers Morgan's set expecting a respectful interview, but instead finds himself face-to-face with the sharpest cross-examination of his career? At first, it feels cordial. Piers greets him warmly, smiling, almost disarmingly polite. The audience settles in, thinking this will be another routine conversation about politics, Trump, and 2024. But within minutes, the temperature in the room begins to rise. Piers doesn't let JD Vance's talking points slide. He digs up the senator's old words, the ones where Vance once called Trump dangerous, even comparing him to America's Hitler. The air tightens. The audience leans forward. JD Vance's practiced grin starts to falter. As the back and forth grows sharper, the line between interview and interrogation blurs. Piers pushes harder. Were you lying then, or are you lying now? By this point, it's no longer a political discussion. It's a raw clash of pride, loyalty, and survival. The audience can sense it. The stakes are no longer about Trump alone. They're about JD Vance's own credibility. And then, in a moment nobody expected, the tension explodes, ending with JD Vance ripping off his microphone and storming out of the studio, leaving Piers Morgan sitting in stunned silence, staring straight into the camera.
The bright lights of Piers Morgan Uncensored flickered on as the studio audience hushed. A mix of anticipation and curiosity filled the room, because tonight wasn't just another interview. Tonight's guest was JD Vance, the Ohio senator and one of Donald Trump's closest allies heading into the 2024 election. The set was polished and sharp, the Union Jack glowing faintly on the massive video wall behind Piers. At center stage sat Piers Morgan himself, leaning back in his chair, hands folded, his trademark smirk already visible. Across from him, JD Vance adjusted his tie, smiling with the kind of confidence only a man sure of his message could carry. "Senator Vance," Piers began, voice smooth and deliberate, "thank you for joining me. You've been called one of Donald Trump's loudest defenders, some would say his political bodyguard." A polite chuckle rippled through the audience. JD smiled but wasted no time. "Piers, I don't see myself as a bodyguard. I see myself as someone standing up for the American people, and Donald Trump represents them better than anyone else." The crowd applauded, though faintly. Piers leaned forward, eyebrow raised. "That's quite the endorsement, but before we get into Trump's future, let's revisit your past." JD's smile tightened. He knew where this was going. "Years ago," Piers continued, flipping through his note cards theatrically, "you described Trump as cultural heroin. You called him an idiot. At one point, you even compared him to, let's not mince words here, America's Hitler." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. JD sat upright, his jaw tightening. "Piers," he said carefully, "people evolve. My views evolved. Back then, I didn't fully understand the disconnect between working Americans and the elite establishment. Trump showed me what I had missed." Piers smirked. "So, you were either wrong then or wrong now." The room stilled. JD forced a smile. "I was wrong then, I'll admit it. People are allowed to change their minds when they learn more." It might have been a neat answer, but Piers wasn't letting go. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "But, Senator, how do voters trust a man who swung from calling Trump an existential threat to suddenly being his loyal lieutenant? Do you believe in your convictions, or do you bend them for power?" The audience gasped again, some clapping, others murmuring in disbelief. JD shifted in his chair. His hands, which had rested calmly moments before, now tapped lightly on his knee. His grin was still plastered on, but his eyes narrowed. "I'll tell you this, Piers," JD replied, firmly. "I may have gotten it wrong before, but the man I've gotten to know, the man I've watched fight for Washington corruption, is the man I trust today, and the American people trust him too." A split in the audience showed itself, cheers from some, disbelieving laughter from others. The stage was no longer just two men talking. It was a battlefield of ideals, pride, and history. And as Piers leaned back with a slow, calculating smile, the audience could sense it. The clash was only just beginning.
The tension from the opening exchange hadn't settled. If anything, the atmosphere in the studio had grown sharper, as though every word from here on would slice deeper into the heart of the debate. Piers leaned forward, elbows on the table, his gaze fixed on JD like a hawk circling prey. Senator, let's not dance around this. Donald Trump is facing multiple indictments, accusations of trying to overturn the election, and charges that frankly would end the career of any other politician. Yet here you are, sitting across from me, calling him the champion of the American people. How do you square that with reality? The audience murmured, some nodding at Piers's question, others visibly bristling. JD tightened his jaw, his composure tested. He clasped his hands together and leaned in. Piers, reality is this. Millions of Americans don't trust the system anymore. They see the Justice Department weaponized against a man who refused to bow to the establishment. These charges, they're not about justice, they're about politics. If you think Trump's being targeted fairly, you're ignoring what's right in front of your face. A wave of applause rolled through the audience, but Piers smirked, pouncing on the answer. So, every indictment, every investigation, every court appearance, what, all just one massive witch hunt? Are you saying Trump has done absolutely nothing wrong? JD's voice sharpened, rising above the murmurs. What I'm saying is that people like you, global elites with a microphone, spend more time tearing down a man who fought for American workers than asking why those workers feel abandoned in the first place, why factories closed, why towns in Ohio were gutted. Trump spoke to them, you don't. That drew a cheer, but also some groans. Piers grinned, sensing both the heat and the cracks in JD's armor. Interesting, Piers fired back, because not long ago you called those very Trump voters desperate and deluded. I've read your own words, Senator. You pitied them. And now you stand here pretending you're their champion. Isn't that the definition of political opportunism? The audience broke into gasps and scattered applause. A few even booed. JD's face flushed, but he didn't flinch. He pointed across the table. Piers, I grew up in those same towns. I know the pain firsthand. I made mistakes in how I described people before. I'll admit that. But unlike some smug commentators, I've actually lived it. My evolution isn't opportunism. It's understanding. Something you wouldn't know about because your career has been built in fancy studios, not in broken-down neighborhoods. The crowd roared, some standing to clap. But Piers didn't blink. He smiled coolly, letting the applause fade before cutting in. You see, Senator, that's where you're wrong. This isn't about me. This is about Donald Trump, the man you once said posed a danger to the Republic. That was JD Vance in 2016. Today, you're sitting here saying he's America's savior. If I can't reconcile those two versions of you, how can the voters? JD leaned in, his voice low but steely. Because the voters know one thing, Piers. Donald Trump never gave up on them, and neither will I. The audience erupted again, half clapping, half shaking their heads. The divide was palpable. But Piers wasn't done. He pulled out a sheet of paper, waving it theatrically. Let's talk about Trump's rhetoric, the chaos, the name-calling, the attacks on judges, journalists, and even his own party members. You want to be vice president someday? Is this really the man you want to tie your entire political legacy to? JD's fists tightened on the desk, his eyes locked on Piers. What you call chaos, I call truth-telling. Trump refuses to play the polished game. He refuses to bow to political correctness. That's why millions love him. He's not a politician, he's a fighter. A fighter or a bully? The line cut through the air like a blade. Gasps,
Then silence. JD's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, voice steady but steely. You can call him a bully. You can call him whatever names you like. But you know what those so-called bullies did? They brought jobs back. They cut taxes. They fought to secure our borders. Tell the families in Ohio who can put food on the table again that it doesn't matter because Piers Morgan thinks Donald Trump tweets too much. The crowd exploded, half in cheers, half in jeers. The divide was growing louder, fiercer. Piers let the noise rise, then raised his hand for silence. His smirk widened into something almost sinister. Senator Vance, I'll give you this. You're loyal. But sometimes loyalty looks a lot like blind obedience. And I can't help but wonder, are you defending Trump because you believe in him, or because your political future depends on it? The words hung in the air like a hammer about to fall. The audience erupted in chatter. Some shouted in support of Piers, others booed him outright. JD's chest rose and fell sharply, his composure visibly straining. The clash had shifted into high gear, the fire now undeniable. The room was no longer just tense, it was combustible, and the real explosion was yet to come.
The studio lights seemed hotter now, almost unbearable, as if they were amplifying the rising tension between Piers and JD. The audience leaned forward collectively, sensing the conversation was about to spiral into something raw and unforgettable. Piers's last words still lingered in the air. Are you defending Trump because you believe in him, or because your political future depends on it? The question had struck a nerve, and everyone could see it. JD's face flushed a deep red. He shifted in his chair, leaning forward so aggressively that his microphone picked up the weight of his breathing. Piers, let me make something very clear. I don't need to defend my political future to you. I didn't come from a media empire or a cushy London upbringing. I clawed my way out of poverty in Ohio. My loyalty to Trump isn't about ambition. It's about loyalty to the people who sent me here. The people who are sick of elites like you, treating them as pawns in your little games. The audience erupted, half cheering, half jeering. Someone in the front row even shouted, "Tell him, JD," while another booed loudly. The split was sharp, almost physical. Piers smirked, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Loyalty to the people. Come on, Senator, let's not kid ourselves. You once called Donald Trump an idiot and said he was leading the country toward disaster. That wasn't decades ago. That was just a few short years back. So why should anyone believe you now? JD's fists clenched on the table, knuckles whitening. His voice rose, the controlled senator giving way to something more visceral. Piers, let me make something very clear. I don't need to defend my political future to you. I didn't come from a media empire or a cushy London upbringing. I clawed my way out of poverty in Ohio. My loyalty to Trump isn't about ambition. It's about loyalty to the people who sent me here. The people who are sick of elites like you, treating them as pawns in your little games. The audience erupted, half cheering, half jeering. Someone in the front row even shouted, "Tell him, JD," while another booed loudly. The split was sharp, almost physical. Piers smirked, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Loyalty to the people. Come on, Senator, let's not kid ourselves. You once called Donald Trump an idiot and said he was leading the country toward disaster. That wasn't decades ago. That was just a few short years back. So why should anyone believe you now? JD's fists clenched on the table, knuckles whitening. His voice rose, the controlled senator giving way to something more visceral. Piers, let me make something very clear. I don't need to defend my political future to you. I didn't come from a media empire or a cushy London upbringing. I clawed my way out of poverty in Ohio. My loyalty to Trump isn't about ambition. It's about loyalty to the people who sent me here. The people who are sick of elites like you, treating them as pawns in your little games. The audience erupted, half cheering, half jeering. Someone in the front row even shouted, "Tell him, JD," while another booed loudly. The split was sharp, almost physical. Piers smirked, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Oh dear, Senator, that temper, very Trumpian of you. Is this how you handle scrutiny? By shouting? By throwing tantrums? No wonder people are questioning whether you're cut out for national leadership." JD shot up from his chair halfway, his body rigid, his voice like a blade. "I'd rather raise my voice than sit smugly on the sidelines mocking the very people who keep this country alive. You're not here to debate, Piers. You're here to sneer. But let me tell you something. Americans are tired of being sneered at. They're tired of being told their pain isn't real. And they're damn tired of people like you calling them stupid for supporting a man who actually listened to them." The audience thundered, clapping, shouting, some even standing. The divide in the room was boiling over. But Piers wasn't done twisting the knife. He leaned forward, lowering his voice for dramatic effect. "You talk about Trump listening, but let's be real. Trump listens to no one. Not his advisors, not the courts, not the voters when they rejected him. He listens only to himself. And Senator, by chaining yourself to him, you've made yourself his echo, nothing more." The room went silent. The insult landed with surgical precision. JD's face hardened, his chest rising and falling heavily. For a moment, it looked like he might actually walk out then and there. Instead, he stood slowly, his chair screeching across the studio floor. The audience held their breath. JD pointed directly at Piers, his voice trembling with fury, but still sharp. "You can call me whatever you want. You can dredge up old quotes, twist my words, insult my loyalty. But at the end of the day, the people I represent know the truth. They know who fights for them, and they know who mocks them from afar. You, Piers, will never understand America. You'll never understand us." The audience exploded, half chanting JD's name, half booing him loudly. The clash had reached a fever pitch, and the studio was on the brink of losing control. Piers leaned back with a smug smile, his voice dripping with irony. "Well, Senator, if that's your final word, then I think we've seen exactly who JD Vance really is tonight."
JD glared, fists trembling at his sides, his patience completely spent. It was clear, one more push, and the explosion everyone had been waiting for would arrive. And Piers Morgan knew exactly how to deliver it. The atmosphere inside the studio was no longer just tense, it was combustible. The clash between JD Vance and Piers Morgan had escalated beyond politics. It had become personal, almost primal. Every word landed like a blow, and every silence carried the weight of a powder keg waiting to ignite. JD still stood, rigid, fists clenched, glaring down at Piers like a soldier refusing to retreat. The audience was divided into camps, half cheering JD's defiance, half roaring their approval of Piers's razor-sharp takedowns. Piers, seeing the storm before him, decided to push just a little harder. His voice was calm, but laced with venom. "Senator Vance, you keep painting yourself as some kind of champion of the people, a voice for the voiceless. But let's strip away the theater, shall we? You wrote a book criticizing Trump, mocking him as a danger to democracy, and now you're his loudest cheerleader. Do you know what that makes you?" He leaned forward, almost whispering into the microphone. "A sellout." The audience gasped collectively, the word hanging in the air like smoke after an explosion. Some clapped, others booed, but all eyes turned to JD. JD's jaw tightened. His face flushed crimson, his breathing sharp and ragged. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Piers. "Don't you ever call me that. Don't you dare question my loyalty, my integrity, my life's work. You sit there behind your smug grin, tossing out insults like you understand what real sacrifice is. But you don't. You never have." Piers tilted his head, feigning pity. "Oh, Senator, I think I understand perfectly. You're willing to trade principles for power.
That's not sacrifice. That's opportunism dressed up as loyalty. The audience roared again, half in agreement, half in outrage. The clash was no longer a debate, it was a spectacle, and everyone knew it. JD took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and Piers's desk. His voice cracked with fury. "I don't need to answer to you," he roared through the studio, rattling even the production crew. The audience gasped as JD ripped off his microphone, the wire snapping free from his suit. The sharp crackle of audio feedback pierced the air. He shoved the chair back violently, the legs screeching across the floor. For a heartbeat, the entire studio froze. Then, chaos. JD turned and stormed off the stage, his footsteps thunderous against the set floor. The audience erupted into pandemonium, half cheering wildly, half booing, others shouting, "Coward!" or "Stand strong!" Cameramen scrambled to follow him, their lenses capturing every furious stride as he vanished behind the curtain. Back at the desk, Piers sat unfazed, almost triumphant. He calmly adjusted his papers, tapped his pen against the desk, and looked straight into the camera. His trademark smirk widened. "Well," he said dryly, "that escalated quickly. I suppose we've just seen what happens when a senator can't handle a few tough questions. America, I'll let you decide what that says about his leadership." The audience's divided roar continued, but Piers carried on smoothly, almost relishing the chaos. Storming off sets is easy. Leading a country, that's a bit harder. Cut to the backstage hallway, where cameras caught JD pacing furiously, running a hand through his hair. Staffers tried to calm him down, but his voice still thundered. "I won't let him smear me like that! I won't!" His words echoed through the corridor, raw, unfiltered. Meanwhile, inside the studio, social media was already exploding. Tweets, posts, and live reactions spread like wildfire. JD Vance just had a meltdown on Piers Morgan's show. Wow! Good for JD. Finally, someone stands up to Piers' smugness. If he can't handle Piers, how can he handle the presidency? This is the fire we need. JD for the people. The clash had gone beyond the studio. It had become viral history in the making. And as JD slammed open the exit door, the cameras catching the fury in his eyes one last time, the message was clear. The breaking point had been reached. The fallout would be seismic.
The studio still buzzed like an aftershock zone long after JD Vance stormed out. Producers scrambled, audience members whispered in disbelief, and camera crews replayed the moment of the desk slam on their monitors, knowing it would be clipped, replayed, and dissected endlessly. Within minutes, Twitter and TikTok erupted into a digital wildfire. Hashtags like #VanceMeltdown, #Pierce versus Vance, and Sellout or Soldier trended globally. Clips of JD slamming the desk looped endlessly, set to dramatic music, sarcastic captions, and fiery debates in the comments. On conservative outlets, the narrative was clear. JD Vance had shown raw passion, a man unwilling to be mocked by a smug media elite. Fox News anchors praised his guts and called it the most human moment in politics this year. Memes portrayed him as a gladiator storming out of a rigged arena. But mainstream and liberal commentators saw a very different picture. A senator who cracked under pressure, who couldn't handle tough questions without lashing out like an unstable hothead. CNN labeled it an unpresidential display of thin skin, while the New York Times editorial board ran with the headline, "If you can't handle Piers, you can't handle Putin." Even late-night comedians joined in. One quipped, "JD Vance just invented a new campaign slogan, 'Make America Storm Out Again.'" The audience roared with laughter. Backstage, however, the reality was more complicated. JD sat in his dressing room, head in his hands, breathing heavily as aides tried to calm him. He felt humiliated, yet also strangely vindicated. "I said what needed to be said," he almost convinced himself. "People will understand." While Piers Morgan leaned back in his chair, sipping water with a wry grin, he knew he'd just scored one of the biggest viral moments of his career.
Not only had he held his ground, but he'd also pushed a rising political star past his breaking point. He walked right into it, Piers told a producer, half smiling. I didn't have to destroy him. He did it himself. The next morning, JD appeared on a conservative talk radio show, his voice calmer but no less defiant. I'm not going to apologize for standing up to media bullies. Piers Morgan disrespected not just me, but every working-class American I fight for. If they want to call that a meltdown, so be it. I call it passion. Supporters rallied, flooding social media with hashtags like #VanceStrong and posting messages of encouragement. He showed real fire. That's what leadership looks like, one wrote. But critics doubled down, pointing to the footage as proof of instability. Editorials piled in, with one analyst bluntly stating, if JD Vance can't handle an interview, how can he handle the nuclear codes? Even neutral voters were divided. Some admired his authenticity, saying they prefer a fighter over a phony. Others said the outburst made them uneasy. Posters quickly noted a spike in Google searches for JD Vance meltdown and Piers Morgan interview. In the end, the clash wasn't just the moment. It became a defining marker of JD Vance's political identity. To his base, he was the fiery underdog who refused to bow to elitist mockery. To his critics, he was a volatile man, too quick to lose control. Piers closed his next show with a smirk, replaying the clip one more time. Leadership, he said, pausing for effect, isn't about slamming desks. It's about staying in the chair when the questions get uncomfortable. For JD, the storm left scars, but also momentum. Love him or hate him, everyone was talking about him. And in the brutal theater of modern politics, sometimes attention itself is the currency that matters most. The clash wasn't just an interview, it was a viral battlefield, and its echoes would follow both men long after the cameras shut off.